Welcome to the Stars in the Making with the mission to inspire and frame the future. The star is the award-winning Dr. Elizabeth Clayborne, founder and CEO of NasaClip. She saw a need for more efficient and easy way to stop nosebleeds after training as an emergency medicine resident and realizing that 500,000 ER visits annually for nosebleeds. She designed the NasaClip to be hands-free, mess-free, easy-to-use device that empower anyone, anywhere to stop nosebleeds fast. She struggled to get an idea off the ground. On record traditional funding, only 2% goes to women, almost none to women of color. Most times are denied at banks. Against all odds, Dr. Clayborne raised $3.5 million for her medical device company. On this episode, Dr. Clayborne goes into details reminding dreamers to dream big, use adversity as power. You don't have to follow traditional path, think outside the box. She's an emergency physician, innovator, entrepreneur, and leader in healthcare policy and reform. She has been featured on several national interviews. Please, let's welcome the founder of NasaClip, Dr. Clayborne. Welcome to the Stars in the Making. Today we're here with Dr. Liz. It's going to be an inspiring episode. If you are a medical student or a founder, entrepreneur, please stay tuned. This will be one. Let's welcome Dr. Liz. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Liz. Oh my goodness, we've been going back and forth almost 2 months. Just to have you here. Thank you so much for being in the Stars in the Making. You are so inspiring.
I appreciate that. It's a big part of my story that I am visible during my climb because not only am I an emergency physician, but I am a physician innovator and a founder of a medical device startup. And I want people to know from my story that this dream is accessible to anyone, no matter what their background might be.
Wow, that's amazing. Dr. Liz, before we even start, I was watching different clips of you, like on CNN, like videos on YouTube, on different podcasts or TV stations. It's just too much. I couldn't even keep up with you. So it's so amazing. So how do you started with the NasaClip? What is
So,
the story behind it?
it's an interesting story because it definitely was not part of my original career trajectory to be a startup founder or an innovator. I was really targeting, going into academic emergency medicine. And so, I am still, faculty member at the University of Maryland. I still practice clinically as an emergency physician. I do about 4 to 5 shifts a month. And when I first pursued medicine, I had a huge focus actually on ethics and health policy, and specifically looking at issues surrounding end-of-life care and health disparities, which I was very passionate about. And so I really thought I was going to have this career in medicine where I'd practice and I'd also do like research and teaching related to these topics related to ethics, since I also have a master's in bioethics. It was actually through the clinical experience of encountering the number of people who show up to the ER for nosebleeds that prompted me to come up with the NasaClip solution. And so it was not part of my original plan to like have this complete abort mission on academic emergency medicine and pursue an innovation and entrepreneurship. But I saw a problem as a clinician that I thought could be better solved, and so I came up with a solution, and I have worked really hard to bring that to market, which is NasaClip, the first and only hands-free adjustable nosebleed rescue device.
Wow, that's amazing. So inspiring. Before we get deep into that, tell us a little bit about you, your upbringing. So is this idea to become a doctor, especially a physician, was your main idea, or that coming from your parents, or what is that? Can you go deep into that? Because I believe that many medical students or whatever the case may be, they can get inspired by this story. Because you are so
Absolutely.
clear it seems like you are very clear in what you are doing.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know if I was one of those kids that from childhood was like, I'm going to be a doctor, because like I have two daughters, 4 and 5, and one of them says they want to be a scientist. The other one absolutely is like, I'm going to be a doctor.
Oh, wow.
I was actually a kid that I think was actually always interested in leadership and always interested in helping other people, but it wasn't super clear that I wanted to be a physician. I grew up in Denver, Colorado. I'm the eldest of 4 kids, so I have 3 younger sisters. So we had an all-girl crew, and I was like, the first child. So, the typical eldest born, overachieving, trying to do everything exactly right. And I always had excelled academically. And my mom was a nurse. So she did give me some very early exposure to the healthcare system. But I often tell people that I think my mom saw early on that there were so many issues with healthcare, especially in the United States. It's a very flawed system. A lot of people refer to it more as a sick care system versus a healthcare system. And so she didn't necessarily encourage me to go into that. My father was an engineer. I think that my parents, what they did is they provided a foundation that let me believe that I could do anything. Like it did not matter what my goals were. If it was something I was passionate about, they gave me the confidence that allowed me to pursue my interests. And whether that was going to be being a physician, an artist, a writer, a teacher, like no matter what it might be, I think that I had the backing of my family and especially my parents to pursue my dreams. And I think that was really essential early on, that I had the freedom to pursue my interests no matter where they led me. So I grew up in Denver, Colorado. I went to Duke University for undergrad, which was an amazing experience. Love North Carolina. And actually, as an undergrad, it was the first time that I started doing something that was a little bit atypical. So I think by the time I got to college, I had some interest in medicine. I had done some shadowing with physician friends that my mom introduced me to. And I think that medicine seemed interesting to me. So I came in with the intention to do medicine, but I was going to go into engineering. And when I got to Duke, I started taking engineering courses and I just really didn't love it as much as I thought I would. I was just like, I'm not signing up for 4 years of only math and science. And I took a very kind of arbitrary course in the religion department and loved it. And I think that that sparked this interest I had in exploring human beings as, these creatures that are multifaceted. And when it comes to their health, making sure that I approach them as like a whole entity and not just a disease entity. And so at Duke, I ended up doing a program called Program 2, where I designed my own major. And so my major was actually in medical ethics and religion. And
Right.
what that meant is that I took all these interesting courses in philosophy and social science and religion that then complemented my pre-med requisites. And I still did everything I needed to do to go into medical school. But I had this kind of social science background and understanding of human beings and kind of the historical context and culture that we live in that gave me a really unique perspective of approaching healing from not just the sciences, right? But approaching it from the social sciences and from understanding people at a different level. So I think I bring that story up because really early on, I started noticing that I was someone who was willing to take risks and do things differently and not take a very traditional path towards my career. And
I
so
love that.
I finished up at Duke. I did 2 years of research at NIH. So I did a research fellowship called SBIR. I'm sorry, not SBIR. I did an intramural research that was for pre-meds, and it was the first time I was like really exposed to like being in the DC area, which I absolutely loved. And I worked in the National Human Genome Research Institute and did research specifically on race, ethnicity, and genetics, which was also really interesting because again, it was a cross between this new kind of genetic science that was like kind of evolving at that time, and also the idea of race, which was a social construct. It was at the time that BiDil was coming out, which is the first race-based therapeutic, very controversial. So I also saw the play of politics in medicine. And so I kind of fell in love with the DMV area and this idea of exploring, science and medicine at the same time. Did 2 years of research there and then went on to medical school at Case Western. And when I entered medical school, I think really early on, it was clear to me that I wanted to do emergency medicine. And I think that evolved because every specialty has a little bit of its personality tied to it. And a lot of people will tell you ER docs, we're kind of like the wild, wild west of medicine. You never know what you're going to do. We have to end up improvising a lot. It's definitely like on the ground in the trenches, dealing with all the things that roll, into the healthcare pit. We're expected to deal with that. And I loved the kind of thrill of being the first person to put my hands on a patient and try to figure out what's going on. And certainly you have the privilege of impacting people at some of their most critical points in life.
Wow.
I tell people often that being an ER doc is interesting because you see the huge extremes of human capacity, both in a negative and positive light. Like you see kind of the worst aspect of humanity when it comes to violence, abuse,
Mm.
disease, delivering terrible news to parents about a child dying or diagnosing someone with cancer. But then at the same time, you might walk into another room and you have a child that just lights up because they're excited that, you're a girl doctor taking care of them, or you're taking care of an older couple that's been married for more than 50 years and they're still doting on each other. So it's kind of a really special and unique specialty. And when I was in medical school, it was pretty clear early on that that's what I wanted to do. What I didn't know when I was in medical school, though, is that I would pursue emergency medicine and then add to my career with this element of being an innovator and a startup founder.
Wow.
But one of the things I did do in med school that was a little bit different is I did a master's in bioethics. So, kind of to bring it full circle from undergrad, where I had an ethics interest, I completed a master's in bioethics at the same time I was in medical school. So, again, it was interesting to be kind of writing philosophy papers while I was in med school. However, I think that kept me grounded as a human being. It was very formative in the way that I became a physician, always keeping in mind that when I take care of somebody in a hospital or healthcare setting, that, there's so much more to them than what I'm just seeing in front of me related to their disease or their particular issue. And I try to take that into account so that I can provide the best care possible.
Wow, that's amazing. So inspiring.
All
So
right, long-winded.
you talk about how do you deal, you talk about working in ER and how you deal with delivering bad news to someone. How do you deal with that? I always wanted to ask a doctor, like, how can deliver a news to someone? Because you deal with that. I don't even know how
Mhm.
to kind of put it, but I mean, is that doesn't get to you a little bit, like when you go home, because
Yeah.
you deal with so much stressful things,
Mhm.
stressful news every day. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, so I think every human being is different with how they deal with stress, how they deal with mortality, how they deal with death in particular. And in the ER, we deal with a lot of unexpected trauma, unexpected death, violence, and we deliver bad news. I have, one of the most difficult things that we do as ER docs is having to, resuscitate someone or try to bring them back to life. And oftentimes, as a physician, you will know when that's really not going to happen, but there'll be a family member like standing next to you that came in with their loved one, and they're like looking to you as the person who could potentially bring this person back, and you just know it's not going to happen, and you have to have I think the grace and the emotional stability to do what's right for that patient and that patient's family member. Keep your composure, keep your team composed, and go through the steps that you need to clinically. And then when you know that there's nothing else can be to be done, to have compassion and delivering that news to that family member and allowing them to go through whatever kind of grief process that they're going to have in that minute. And most people do not know how they're going to respond, right? Like anywhere from screaming, wailing to just like accepting it, silence. And you just have to have space for not just the family that you're delivering the news to, but like how you're going to respond. I don't think that I respond the same way to any same situation. But I do think that a lot of physicians try to create containers, which are not always healthy, where you kind of try to keep things in a work, I guess, with you boundary.
Yeah.
And not always bring it home. But to me, there's a little bit of
Doctor,
falsehood in that. Like
Doctor,
it
I don't want to
always seeps
interrupt
in and it
you.
affects you personally.
Yeah, I don't want to interrupt you. That's exactly, that should be my next question. So for me, I don't know how to cope with these things. Like, how do you guys cope with that? Separating yourself from all those problems that you get every day and not bring that home, that's really hard.
Mhm.
And how do you really
It is.
cope with
And
all that?
I think that first of all, I'll say that I don't think a lot of people do it well. I think that you might think you're doing it maybe because you didn't cry and you kept your composure and you walked out of the room, and in less than 5 minutes were in somebody else's room who had no idea what just happened, right? And so I think that you might try to convince yourself that, you're keeping a boundary and you're keeping it separate, but I think it always seeps in. And so for me, a lot of what I teach my residents now that I'm in attending is that you really need to know yourself, your own emotional capacity, and how you discharge energy. A lot of times what I found is if you hold it in, like you go through something traumatic, right? A child dies in front of you. It's not normal to just like walk out of the room as if nothing happens and go about your day. You need to have some kind of processing. And I think that taking the time to understand yourself and how you deal with that is important. For me, I might need to go outside. I might need to breathe for a second. I might need to, like, remove myself from that clinical situation and look at a picture of my own kids to remind myself of the reality that I'm still living in. I think that over time, I've learned more and more what allows me to kind of discharge negative energy so that I can ground myself and then go about my day. But that takes sometimes time and experience. And it's definitely a misnomer if people tell you it just doesn't impact them. It impacts everyone to certain degrees in some capacity.
Right.
And if you're ignoring how it's impacting you, it's likely building up in your body and in your mind somewhere in a negative way. And I think that this is true of a lot of different careers, right? Not just in medicine, but we all carry stress from our jobs, no
That's
matter
right.
what it might be. Running a business, in a startup is very stressful. In some ways, my experience as a startup founder was more stressful than my job as an ER physician. And
That's
people think that that's
exactly right. I
outlandish,
wanted to come with,
but
uh-huh. Go ahead, please.
yes, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to get into that. How do you deal with all this, I would say stress for you, you used to this, being a doctor, ER doctor, which is requires a lot of mental strength and more, plus your company, Nesaclip. How do you kind of put everything together?
Yeah. So I was recently on a retreat with a bunch of investors and founders, and someone mentioned to me that they think that ER physicians in general are actually great kind of prototypes for founders because our job requires us to do several things that a founder is required to do, which is we actually have to put out fires all the time, right? There's like many disasters that are always going on when you're starting a company, whether it's
Right?
financially or if you have a product coming to market or technology or dealing with employees or whatever it might be. There is like literally something that is about to erupt at all times. The same thing happens in the ER, right? It's just like chaos all the time. So we're adept at looking at the big picture, the overall flow of an ER department, and prioritizing where those issues are. Where are my sickest people? Where is someone who's about to die? Which person needs help? How much staff do I have? Like, what is it going to look like tonight? And so we're good at like kind of identifying the biggest problems, tackling them, and understanding the assets, the resources that we have. And that's what you also need as a founder. The other thing that I think the ER doctors are good at is we tend to be really emotionally intelligent, like a good read of people, right? Because I need to go in a room and in less than 5 minutes, I'm going to ask you questions about maybe some of the most sensitive information that you haven't even shared with your own family. And I have to establish a relationship with you where you trust me. And I have to be able to assess with that person in a matter of minutes, like, are they exaggerating their symptoms or are they downplaying them? Are they here just because they want a work note or are they about to die?
Mhm.
And, is this person going to walk out of the door and potentially I'm going to miss something that could be catastrophic? Or, is this something where I need to move through this quickly because there might be someone else in the waiting room that's more sick? So, kind of assessing people and reading in between the lines and being emotionally intelligent is really important as an ER doc. And it's really important as a founder, right? Like, you have to be a good read of people as a founder so that you know who you're adding to your team, who's investing in you, how people are responding to your ideas, your innovation, your product. And you
Right.
have to kind of have that gut feeling, right? That drives your instincts and moving forward. And those are things that are required in both. And then on top of that, you are usually bouncing a lot at the same time, right? Multitasking, you might call it, or like being able to maintain balance in the middle of chaos, as we talked about. Because a lot of times, what people realize is that you're not just starting a company. Life is going on while you're building a company, right? Like while
That's
I was building
so right.
Nasaclip, I had two
Sometimes I
small
do.
children.
Mhm.
I was going through a divorce. I was still practicing. COVID had just, started when I really like started working on this company. So there were
Right.
all these external factors that you had to deal with. And, life doesn't start or stop depending on, what's going on with your company or what's going on in an emergency department. So you still have to be able to balance everything that's going on with you personally and professionally and make sure that you're, dedicating time and energy to both of those. And so for me, I think being an ER physician was the perfect training ground for me to be a great founder and entrepreneur because it allowed me to make sure that I knew how I functioned, well in chaos, that I
Right.
knew what I personally needed to flourish and how to build teams around me that were going to allow me to succeed.
Wow, that's interesting. So, doctor, you were talking about very important things now. So, for those founders, like what is the message that you want to send to founders that, just starting startups or whatever the case may be? How do you deal with risks by taking risks? I know you mentioned taking risks. So, how do you
Mhm.
deal with that?
Yeah, there's like a rarely well-known saying that there's no risk, no reward. And to a degree, that's really true. I mean, I think that in some cases, people just have great timing and there's a degree of luck that's involved with people making it. But at the same time, in so many parts of my career that I've already explained to you, I took a lot of risks, right? I did a lot of non-traditional things, whether it was taking time off before I went to med school, which was really uncommon at that time, or doing a non-science major as a pre-med or doing a dual degree in medicine. And then, when it came to NasoClip, I came up with the idea because we see about 500,000 ER visits a year for nosebleeds. And I just couldn't believe that people would show up to the ER for such a simple problem. But I found that people tend to mismanage nosebleeds. They put their head back instead of forward. They pinch up here in their nasal bridge, not down here. And then they don't hold constant pressure. And I know as a physician that to stop a nosebleed, most of the time you just need to hold 10 to 20 minutes of uninterrupted pressure. And that sounds simple to do, but it's a lot harder to do, you might think. Nobody's holding their nose without letting go a little bit for 10 to 20 minutes. And
Right.
then if you combine that with the fact that nosebleeds are most common in kids, 2 to 10, and older adults, 55 to 80, who might be on blood thinners, it's like the least likely population to deal with it well. So I think they panic, right, when they can't get their bleeding to stop and they show up in front of me. But for me as an ER doc at the time, I was like, did you just have a gunshot wound or, are you having a heart attack? It wasn't a high acuity issue, but it was
Right.
something that still did need to be dealt with because blood was involved. And I didn't really think we had great solutions. So I came up with one, which I'll show you in a second. But
Right.
I think for me, it was important that I decided not only that I had a solution in my head at the time that I thought would work, but I took the risk of jumping in and pursuing that and fumbling through the steps to develop the product and eventually get it to market. And for
Wow.
a lot of people, they're not going to get past that step of like, I think I have an idea that might be a good idea. So happy to talk to you about how you take those next steps, because I think for
Mhm.
founders, the most important step is going to be, okay, I think I have an idea. And then what do I do about that? What's the
Right.
next most immediate step?
Wow, that's so interesting. So now, Dr. Liz, let's go about how do you create it? How do you started with the Nuzzaclet? So how
Mhm.
you guys created that?
Yeah, so I knew from my clinical training that to provide good nosebleed relief, you needed constant pressure, and there were some medications that we use, like oxymetazoline or Afrin, which is a vasoconstrictor, that was helpful in nosebleeds. And so I was like, let me see what I can do to combine that in a device that's easy to use, hands-free, and can be over the counter. Because my whole idea was that a lot of these people did not need to be in the ER. And so this is what our device looks like. It has these open cell medical grade sponges that can be medicated with agents, and if
Uh-huh.
you were having a nosebleed, you'd simply clear your nose of clot,
Yeah,
insert the nasal sponge, rotate it into place, and squeeze shut. And
that's
just
it.
like that, you have firm, constant, uninterrupted pressure. And when you
Yeah,
squeeze here, this is putting internal pressure in the right anatomic location. Leave it in place 10 to 20 minutes, release, and check for bleeding.
and that's
And
it.
we have both adult, which is 14 plus, as well as pediatric sizes.
Right.
And so I just took like the knowledge I had as a clinician and was able to talk to an engineering team about, designing that in a way that makes it accessible for anyone to have that, Dr. Liz solution to nosebleeds available to them no matter where they are. And from there, it's really taken off. And we've even now developed iterations of the device that are now going to be used as a drug delivery platform. So I know I mentioned to you early on that we've been in the market now for about a year with a heavy focus on ERs, urgent cares, schools, sports medicine, cruise lines, airlines. But now we're also going to be launching onto Amazon this coming
Wow,
fall. So we're really
that's amazing.
excited. We have a reusable version of the device for chronic bleeders where the sponge can
Mhm.
be replaced. And we're launching a WeFunder campaign. And I know we haven't talked about this yet, but fundraising is one of those key steps. After you have your idea,
Yes,
you're
I
going to
wanted to go
immediately
to the
need to know, how do I
fundraising.
raise capital?
Dr. Lee, please do not forget about this. Let's not forget about this. It's so interesting, your story on the fundraising. Please explain a little bit more. How do you went about this?
Yeah. So for me, the first steps I took after I had the idea is I wanted to first make sure that the idea had teeth. So
Mhm.
I always tell people when you have an idea, first, like try to do your own type of patent search. Make sure it's a unique idea. Sometimes that can cost a lot of money, or you can just try to search on your own. But protecting your intellectual property is one of the first things you need to do, especially in the industries of like tech, life science, medical device. But that takes money, right? As soon as you start
Right.
paying lawyers, there's money involved. So the other thing I tell people though is before you start looking for money, fundraising, and pouring your blood, sweat, and tears into something, you should validate that there's going to be a real market for your idea. Because, you know, a lot of us get attached to our babies, and you need to make sure your baby's going to one day be able to turn you a profit. And so one of the ways you can do that is accelerator programs, pitch programs, and also doing kind of customer discovery. So I did the NSF, National Science Foundation I-Corps really early on, where I did a lot of customer interviews and asked people, how do you know to treat nosebleeds? Why do you do that? Who told you that? And I really kind of was able to elucidate where my best channels existed for this device and confirm that people would pay, you know, for my solution if I brought it to market.
That's
Then
fine.
where I went for fundraising is, you know, early on, I did a pre-seed round of about $1 million. And at the time, I was able to tap into a lot of my fellow physicians for fundraising. I know a lot of founders who come from my background, whether that's being a minority or a woman, it is difficult to get those early dollars. Because for someone to invest in you as an angel investor, they need to be an accredited investor, which usually means they have to have $1 million
Doctor.
of value or make more than 250 a year. And that sometimes may not be your network.
Mm,
And so in those situations, I would seek out angel groups that might be targeting either the discipline that you're in or want to support someone like, you know, your demographic. For me, a lot of my early investors thought I had a good idea, but also they just were supportive of me. They liked me, right? They were betting on the jockey. They were like, I want Dr. Liz to win. And they were willing to support someone who was a woman and a person of color because there is a huge dearth of funding that goes to women or people of color within venture capital and the startup world. I think I mentioned to you earlier that only 2% of venture capital
right.
is going to women right now, which is just abysmal. And for Black women, it's less than a percentage, like 0.34%. So it's a really uphill battle to raise
Wow.
money. So you want to
Mm,
start in the circles that might support you. And those might be groups that, you know, want to support people who they think need and deserve a chance,
this
or
goes
because they
by
think, you know, your
demographic.
technology and the investment
Wow.
technology. Mhm.
Mm.
And then
Oh,
after you do initial raises, then you can approach institutional money. And I think there's a lot of different ideas about raising VC money or institutional money. And I have both angels and VCs on my cap table. I've raised $3.5 million to date. And I think that, you know, there's a lot
wow.
of growing
That's
pains with comes
amazing.
that comes with raising capital. In some regards, I tell people you should try to bootstrap and like refrain from fundraising as long as you can, because as soon as you have like a VC on your cap table, you're on a timetable, right? They expect certain progress milestones and returns. And sometimes you need to always be sure that you're getting into bed with somebody who's supporting you financially that's going to align with your mission and your values. And I've
Right.
seen other founders get into trouble when they take money from, you know, sources where there's some conflict there. So
Mm,
it's really like a marriage. And
yeah.
so while it's difficult to fundraise, I always tell people it doesn't mean that you're winning just because you have institutional money. There's a lot of other ways to raise money, which is why, you know, I mentioned to you, we actually are funding, we're launching a WeFunder campaign this coming fall
Mhm.
to make investing in a NasaClip more accessible to people no matter what their background is.
Right.
And I'm excited about that because I want the everyday person to be able to kind of invest for equity in my
Yeah.
company. And there's been a lot of changes, I think, in the landscape of fundraising that has changed over time. And I think that crowdfunding in particular is something that has significantly taken some turns and become more popular and accepted by companies, no matter what their stage is. And it's exciting to me because it gives accessibility to founders like myself and also investors who might come from diverse backgrounds.
Wow. That's amazing. So, Dr. Lees, let's go back to this point. So, how many percent, like you said, for Black women, women of color, is 2%?
No, that's women, all
That's
women,
women.
2%. Black women is 0.34,
That's really,
which rounds to
that's really
what?
low.
Zero. Like basically nothing.
Nothing, of course. Wow. So
So,
how
you know, the other way I illustrate this so that you can understand the metrics
Mhm.
is that an average a white male founder might need to talk to about 7 contacts to get like a yes or a return on investment, whereas a black female founder needs to speak to about 10 times that amount, 70 people to get one
Wow.
yes.
Wow.
So it's just, you know, when you talk about against the resiliency that's needed, right? Whether it's me being an ER doc and dealing with chaos or the ups and downs of the startup, you got to have tough skin, right? You need to hear, you hear a lot of no's
That's
before you
right.
hear a yes. And so as a founder, one of the most important characteristics that I think every founder has is belief in self, confidence in self, vision in self. If you don't have that and you can't communicate that energetically and emotionally to other people, no one else will follow you.
You're
So
not
you
gonna
got to
make
make sure you have that for yourself first.
wow. And I see how you articulate your thoughts, your ideas in different interviews. You are so confident. Not everybody has that because there is people with great ideas, but they cannot really, put it out there or just the guts to deal with the
Mhm.
no's. No's. By the way, how do you think founders or whatever the case may be should deal with no's?
I mean, you hear no in all parts of your life, whether you realize it or not. It's just that sometimes when it's related to something that you want really bad, it hurts more. And so I think that there is a ability for you to like turn that into focusing on the yeses and drowning out the no's because they're going to be there and they don't necessarily mean anything about you or your idea. It just might mean sometimes it means not right now, right? It doesn't mean no, it means not right now. So that's one trick that I always use. It's like, I'm going to interpret that no as a not right now. We're going to talk again, right? After I have more traction, and then you might be a yes.
Mm,
Um, the other thing is that, you know, the no's can't be reflective of you as your own personal value and how you see yourself,
right.
right? So you can't internalize the no's as representing what you are worth. It just has to be what that relationship is with that person and leaving it at that.
I think we live in a world where with social media and people are not patient nowadays. So how
Mhm.
do you deal with all these things? Patient, what is your message to send to, to founders or whatever the case may be? Because nowadays we have a lot of, I think because of social medias, like watching highlight reels, whatever the case may be, people think that things happen right away. And when it doesn't happen, um, they tend to give up. So what is your message?
Right. Yeah, you know, I think that a lot of times people have to remind themselves that when they're looking at a successful founder, or even if you're looking at me and you're like, wow, look at how much she's accomplished. She's raised, you know, more than $3 million and has a product in the market. I first came up with this idea in 2015, right? And so for the first 5 years, I didn't really work on it because life was happening and I was having kids and, you know, doing my academic thing. But I have been diligently working on this for, you know, the last 4 to 5 years. And that's a long time to grind and like not necessarily know that you're going to be successful. Even now, I'm like, I believe I'm going to be successful, but there's always, you know, a possibility that it couldn't happen. And so you do have to have the mentality that this is a marathon and not a sprint. And I do think a lot of younger generations and like maybe people who are interested in this that are just starting out have less tolerance for the long run. And so a lot of times what I tell people is that to cope with that, make sure you're enjoying life while you're grinding, right? You can't be in a position where you're like, I'm going to start, you know, taking care of my health when, or I'm going to start enjoying, you know, relationships when I finish this or I accomplish that, or I'm going to pause and, you know, take care of myself after I get to this milestone, because there will always be another hill, another mountain, another milestone, another goal that you have, and that will continue forever. So you have to be in a mindset where you're prepared to deal with all the no's and the ups and downs because you're enjoying yourself during the journey, right? That the journey is part of the prize.
Mhm.
And I think that that's what builds the resilience that's needed to be a long time entrepreneur that can be successful, because you might ultimately not win with whatever your current endeavor is. You might pivot and have to develop something else. A lot of people who are innovators and entrepreneurs are serial entrepreneurs, right? They have multiple startups, multiple companies, and not all of them are going to be, you know, knocking it out of the park.
You
That
can't
doesn't mean that your next idea might not be that one. So you have to have kind of the patience with yourself and the kind of support that you're providing yourself so that you can keep moving forward.
Wow. That's amazing. So what are you saying is you cannot just put your eggs in one basket because if you fail,
Right. I mean, I would say that a lot of founders do have the mentality that all their are in one basket. I think that it's more that like you can put all your eggs in your one basket, and then if it doesn't work out, just know you can build yourself another basket. That's more
that's
the analogy
I
that I
love
would use.
that. I
Like,
love that.
just understand that it might blow up. And that doesn't mean that you can't start over and that you can't do something else. Because like a lot of times it does require you to go all in and like put everything on the line. But I think that you can do that if you know, like, if this ultimately doesn't work, I'm still going to land on my feet. I'm still going to have another idea. I'm still going to drive. And it shouldn't feel like a waste because you're enjoying yourself during the journey. That's like the biggest, caveat is that you don't want to like not be enjoying your life. And as an ER doc, this hits really home for me, right? Because I just shared with you how often
That's
I
right.
see tragedy happen and you never know. You never know what might happen. Like not every day is promised. Like nobody that I'm pronouncing dead in the ER, I think woke up on the day that they died and thought they were going to die. Like you don't know. So you should be living, in the present and enjoying your life, even while you're grinding and even while you're hustling.
Wow. That's so interesting, doctor. Thank you so much for being in the Stars in the Making with this amazing message. So now, Dr. Lees, what is the last message that you want to send out there? Secret for life. Anything you want to tell anyone out there going through some hardship or founders, startups, especially. What is that
Yeah,
last?
I think that for today, the thing that it has really been resonating with me the most, when I look back at my journey and how far I've come and how far I expect to go and all the things I'm looking forward to, is that I'm just like so proud and in love with myself right now, right? I am so proud of how I've taken care of myself during this journey. I'm so proud of the wonderful people I've attracted to my team and to my mission. And I think that the reason I've been successful is that I've kind of made myself a magnet because people are attracted to the good energy that I think I try to effervesce, right? And that brings more opportunities and more positivity my way. And even when things get hard and they are hard a lot, right? And I have a lot of unexpected, disappointing things happen in my personal and professional life. I'm able to move through those periods and maintain the positivity and spirit I need to move forward and have that essential belief in myself. And I think that early on, if you can harness whatever it is that makes you tick. And I encourage everyone who's passionate about being an entrepreneur, a founder, or an innovator, like go after something until it lights a fire under you and that you're excited for it. Like the dream I have for my kids is that they can grow up and get paid to do something they love. And that's going to be different for everyone. But if you can do that, you're setting yourself up for a life of success because then the money I think the money comes naturally when you get into that vein, but the money doesn't even matter as much because you're doing something that you really enjoy. And for me, I've really kind of carved out this unique career as a physician, as an innovator, as a founder, and as like a leader that I really see myself as. And I just love it. I'm just loving life right now. And I'm looking forward to all my next steps.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for this message. Dr. Lees, you just reminded me something. There's something I have to ask you that I cannot forget. So you accomplished so much for being, a woman of color and so a leader, an innovator. You have come so, so far. For those one that they feel sorry for themselves, like, okay, I am this, or I'm a woman of color, whatever the case may be, I'm the minority, I'm not gonna make it there. What is your take on that?
So, I tell people all the time that sometimes living through adversity is your superpower. I do a keynote speech where I really focus on why I personally think that women, and particularly women of color, are primed to be our best leaders. And what's at the basis of that argument is that I think that a lot of times women and people of color have to survive, not just survive, but thrive in circumstances of challenge and turmoil. And it's that experience of surviving and thriving when it's not that easy that makes you good, that sharpens your edge, that allows you to be successful. And so instead of looking at it as like maybe woe is me or this is more challenging than it is for other people, you can look at how can I like live through this and then capitalize on that experience so that I can accelerate myself forward? And I think if you switch, your perspective on it, you'll see that those challenges are actual just like golden opportunities for growth. And so the more challenges you have, the more golden opportunities you have for growth, and the faster and mightier you might grow.
Wow, that's amazing. Dr. Liz, again, thank you so much for being with us. We really, really appreciate you from the bottom of my heart, from the team of the Stars in the Making. We appreciate you for taking your time to join us today.
Absolutely, Ricardo. It's been my pleasure.
I have no message, guys, to send to you. Dr. Liz said everything. So that's pretty much it. I hope you guys are motivated by this and go be great. This is Ricardo, and take care.